Hello, I'm Mark Ellen. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of conversations David Hepworth and I have had on this podcast we started 17 years ago. Some with ourselves, others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you enjoy them and want to support us and keep it all coming and get extra entertainment, including the weekly quiz and a special event on your birthday, visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear or just like or subscribe in whatever way you prefer.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So all sorts of celebrations this week about Bob Marley, who would have been 80, and interesting documentaries on the BBC in the UK. One about him coming to Britain, and it reminded me that there were various groups who had to come to Britain to achieve success. You know, the Walker Brothers, you know, made it after being recognised in Britain, and the Byrds. And the Beach Boys, actually, to some extent. Hendrix, Ramones, Blondie, Nirvana, I would say was probably true, wasn't it? The Killers. It's quite interesting because he came over in Blackwell. The records were made in Britain, and they had all that sensibility.
Well, I don't think they were. I think the original. I think Marley would record the basic tracks in Jamaica, and then Blackwell would. They
then doctored, weren't they, in Britain? That's right.
Well, certainly those first one or whatever, because it had like Rabbit Bundrick and it had pedal steel on it. Things like that. It intrigued me because he wanted them to be received like rock records. So in a way, to a certain extent, he didn't want them to sound like reggae records.
Because they have kind of electric lead guitar solos, don't they? And those kind of rock keyboards.
It also had, I read somewhere that he had in mind that it had to have a specific number of tracks, i.e. not too many, because you have to remember that before, Bob Marley, Natty Dread and Burning and so forth, there were reggae albums aplenty in Britain, but they tended to be on the Trojan label, and they tended to be quite low production values. And they tended to cram in loads and loads of tracks and not have a great deal of signal on the records. So Blackwell's production of Marley's records were very kind of different. They sounded more like rock records. And that was the thing that got them over the hump in the UK eventually. But yes, acts had to come to Britain. I think at the time, it strikes me, you're looking back in the 70s and the early 80s, there were kind of 3 cities in the world where you could break an act. And one was London, and one was New York, and one was Los Angeles. It was just as simple as that. It was those three.
And if anyone made it in any of those places, the other places would hear about the world press actually would hear about it.
It was like there were little triangular trade, between those 3 cities. And those were the cities where the record companies were based. And those were the cities where they had the media. And those were the cities, interestingly, in the 70s and 80s, where the British music papers like Melody Maker and NME would maintain their own correspondent.
Yeah, they had the UK Bureau Desk. That's right.
Yeah.
Reporter writes a weekly column from LA or whatever.
And then they'd have somebody in LA or somebody in New York. I think in Melody Maker's case, probably both, actually. And, there's just an immense amount of news came from those places. And so, if you got the emergence of, I don't know, television or talking heads in the East Coast of America, you read about them in the NME, didn't you? And if if Elton John went to Los Angeles Troubadour and did his residency at the Troubadour, was filled the stage with flags. That was immediately reflected back in London and in New York, and so that those were the 3 places you had to go. And you always had that curious thing that British bands went to America and they would go and play somewhere in New York, I don't know, Danceteria or somewhere like that, or the Mud Club or whatever.
Yeah.
And there would be 200 people there, 200 downtown hipsters, and somebody from the New York Times, and somebody from the Melody Maker, and somebody from Trouser Press. And they go down really well, and they think they cracked America. And then the following night, they would have driven,
they go outside of there's nobody there.
They'd still find themselves. The curious thing that really took a lot of getting used to for British acts was that they would drive 500 miles out of New York City and still be in New York State. Yeah. Which is a profoundly disorienting idea for a British person.
Greeted
Canada. There's nobody there. You go
hang out the bunting.
There's literally nobody there, because the great truth is, that New York is an island off the coast of America, and and Los Angeles is its own thing as well. So they ended up in Moose Droppings, Ohio, wondering why nobody turned up and nobody cared. But
the reverse thing happened with the Sex Pistols, didn't it? Because he kind of went out there and thought he would crack America by playing those very places.
Well, no, he didn't. He went, and Malcolm McLaren, this is really interesting, when he finally took the Sex Pistols to America, he was so terrified of the judgment of the New York or Los Angeles kind of taste-making establishment that he thought, right, I'll take him in Texas, or, I'll go out in the middle of nowhere, where we won't get that kind of interest. It's a little bit like we often talk about British tours in the late 70s, early 80s. Always began at the West Runton Pavilion in Norfolk, didn't they? Because that was far enough away. They get close enough to London.
Will not bother to send somebody.
Close enough to London that they could get there, they could drive there on the day, kind of thing, but not sufficiently close that the Melody Maker or the NME or Sounds
they're sharpening their knives, puncturing the entire tour.
And so McLaren's whole idea with the Sex Pistols was keep him out of that place. Of course, that backfired, in the worst possible way. He would have been better off taking all the press attention that there was. But it is curious that the business of those three cities and how fast word used to go between these cities. That if you could make it there, you can make it anywhere, kind of thing. That if you made it in New York, you instantly had to go and play
on Broadway. Clash on Broadway. A question of them looking at the British press and thinking, well, these people are piping hot. Let's try that over here.
Yeah, and then during Punk you got things like Elvis Costello. It wasn't just in New York; it was on Saturday Night Live, wasn't it? So it was instantly across the country. So you don't get that kind of thing any longer, really. But also going back to the Walker Brothers thing, that there was that feeling that back in the mid-'60s that it was best to be taken as being British. So if you're a long-haired guys from Hollywood, you were 10 a penny in Hollywood. Nobody bothered about you. Whereas if you'd made it in England, you had that kind of exotic. You had the dust of England on your boots, which was considered a good thing. But there's also the con. But
also there was something about the British as tastemakers, wasn't there?
There was.
British press was considered to be that's if you could crack that was really valuable.
Although only a couple of years later, I was watching an interview only the other day, an old interview of Sting. He said, because famously, Miles Copeland took advantage of Freddie Laker's Sky Train. Do you remember that? The cheap flights.
It landed about £99 or something.
No, it was a bit more than that, but it was cheap compared to what it had been. And so basically, he sent the police to play some dates on the East Coast of the United States. And the story that trickled back here was that they cracked it in America. Well, I was watching this interview thing and said, we hadn't cracked it in America. Not remotely. You know
they're
what I
playing
mean?
tiny little places.
We played tiny little venues. We kind of went down okay, but it wasn't anything extraordinary. But it was enough. It was a story in Britain. It was enough to give them a leg up, wasn't it?
Yeah,
the
let's
fact
take
that
these people seriously.
yeah, that they'd gone to America. Yeah, so it was.
Do you ever look at the out of idle curiosity, the most streamed tracks? I was thinking about Marley last week, and I thought I'd just look up and see what his most streamed tracks were on Spotify. It's interesting because it's never the political things. It's always the tracks that would go down best when listened to by a 25-year-old on a beach in Thailand. You know, Bob Marley's most played tracks are "Could You Be Loved" is the first, "One Love" is the second, and "Three Little Birds."
Yeah. I suppose I'm not entirely surprised.
Dylan, "Knocking on Heaven's Door." Like a Rolling Stone, the times they are changing. Stones, "Paint It Black."
Well, there you see, that's a surprise, and that's interesting because you would expect that Stones it would be, I don't know, Satisfaction or Start Me Up or something like that, and it's not. It's "Paint It Black," and I think that's because it's been adopted in various kind of spooky American streaming TV successes,
it has,
or on video games and so forth. But I was intrigued to see that you would have thought, if you looked up Queen, you would have thought, wouldn't you, Bohemian Rhapsody, for goodness sake. You would have thought We Are the Champions, wouldn't you? You would have thought, you would have thought We Will Rock
but they're not the first, are they?
They're not the number one most streamed Queen song on Spotify is "Don't Stop Me Now." Isn't that amazing?
You never have predicted that.
I would never
have
have
reason. It
predicted
might have been used on an ad or something that you and I don't know about.
And the number one
Bowie
most Bowie. It's not Heroes. It's not. I don't know.
It's not Starman.
Let's Dance, and it's not Starman. It's Under Pressure.
Which
again, you know, with Queen. Some of them are quite predictable. The Kinks, you said, you know, you really got me, Lola, and All Day and All the Night. It's kind of what you'd expect, really. I would have expected that. That's a bit straight down the line. And the Who,
Joni Mitchell, really predictable, I thought. Joni Mitchell.
What is that going?
Yes.
Well,
bound to be. It's got to be.
I suppose it's bound to be. But, you know, what this indicates is that, you know, in future, these most streamed tracks the catalogue will remain the same, but the tracks that are most streamed will change. They just will, you know, because it'll be different generations latching on to things for
and they'll
different
access
reasons.
them through a different route. As you say, there'll be a Netflix series or something that's using them.
But it's, you know, it's like we always say, you know, the Beatles, it's Here Comes the Sun, isn't it?
Again, that's my beach in Thailand theory. Proved.
Yeah,
it's the thing that makes. I'm going on holiday. I'm 25. What shall I put on my playlist? It's that really.
Yeah,
it's like the Velvet Underground, Pale Blue Eyes, Sunday Morning. Those are the top two. Yeah, Pale Blue Eyes, the number one. Yeah.
Oh, so do you think now that's interesting. So do you think there's a general move towards kind of reflective lyricism rather than rousing anthems? Do you think that might be?
Oh, yeah. It's escape and it's entertainment and it's warmth and it's comfort. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Because you never get big political rally-rousing songs high on those lists. You just don't. None of Bob Marley's ones. It's just interesting, isn't it? Bob Marley, it's "Could You Be Loved" and "One Love" and "Three Little Birds." I mean, it's interesting.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
So were we enthralled by the Grammys, Mark? As it
it's funny. There's something about the Grammys when you read obituaries, and if somebody says, you know, Oscar-nominated actor or Oscar-winning, whatever, you sort of take some notice of that. It has some gravitas. It has some weight. But when they say Grammy Award winning so and so,
it's like who isn't? Who isn't? For God's sake,
the heart tends to sink because it's just the way they try to establish to people outside the the kind of the inner sanctum, what value and what importance these artists might have. They won a Grammy, you know. And I don't know, I just associate Grammys with things like kind of sound production. And, you know, it's just, it doesn't necessarily in any way indicate any kind of quality or quality that I can kind of measure. But I just thought the Grammys this year was really interesting because two of the winners, as you know, were Now and Then by the Beatles, best rock performance.
Oh,
best rock performance. I really don't. The other rock performances were, the Black Keys, Green Day, Idols, Pearl Jam, and St. Vincent. Now, you know, that's one. And the other one was Hackney Diamonds by the Stones as being the best rock album. And they were up against, who was it? The Black Crowes, Green Day, Idols,
Fontaines,
Pearl
DC.
Jam, and Fontaines, and Jack White. And you kind of think, well, either that's a really good thing, that those things, because Now and Then was genuinely good. And I thought, I don't think you agreed, but I thought Hackney Diamonds was also a really good record. So I thought either we're really pleased that these people are still getting recognition, or it's a kind of publicity gimmick by the Grammys, who know they'll get a load of attention if they give the Stones and the Beatles awards. Or things are in such a parlous and desperately thin state that these genuinely are better than all these. I have no idea at all. But that was the state of it. It's very hard to get excited about the Grammy.
I did see somebody suggest that there ought to be a senior category at the Grammys now for kind of over 60s or something, because it's a sort of totally different thing, isn't it?
Totally different thing. How can you measure Now and Then, a demo tape remade however many years after the event, against, you know, a record by Pearl Jam or whatever? I really don't know.
But also
the other interesting thing was Chappell Roan, wasn't it? Did you follow that?
Well, before we get to Chappell Roan, just first of all, I mean, Beyonce, best country album. For God's sake, it's not. For goodness sake. I mean, it's a good record. It's a pop record, for crying out loud. It's not a country record.
No, but also Beyonce won best album, didn't she? So I would have thought, because she was up against the country category, she was up against Post Malone, Casey Musgraves, Chris Stapleton and Lainey Wilson. I mean, genuine country acts who must have been really mortified, because obviously it's a good thing as regards country that she made a record, Cowboy Carter, that used a lot of country elements in it and promoted the whole notion of country. But they must have been very aggrieved that she could win best album and then best country album as well. It's not.
It's not, because
it's a really good record. Country Carter is a really good record.
It's a really good record, but it's not a country record. And do you know why it's not a country record? And forgive me if I sound like a stuck record. Country records have one thing in common. They're all story songs. That's how country works. Here's a story about me and my life, or a guy who lives down the road, or somebody I know I went to school with. Yeah. And you listen to the story and it's supposed to have a moral. That's the identifying characteristic of country records. Hip-hop records, hip-hop pop records, not like that at all. They're all about me. I'm amazing. I'm so cool. I'm so hip. And that's fine. But there's totally different tradition.
Yeah.
Anyway, as you
also
said,
had a cover of Blackbird, didn't it, by Paul McCartney, you know, which is great. It was really good, actually. It's really good. But again, that doesn't advance the world of country, you know, half an inch.
So then Chappell Roan, who wins an award, takes to the microphone, as they say. And apparently she'd always promised herself that when she was going to be faced by a room full of music executives and power brokers, she was going to take an opportunity to make a bit of a statement, which I thought was rather touching, the idea that I'll tell them and they'll all suddenly go, oh, do you know, that's right.
God, I'd never thought of that before.
I never thought of that before. But what she said was that, and this obviously particularly applies to artists in the States, that they ought to pay artists what she called the living wage and cover their health insurance. And I thought it's quite interesting, this, because this is not the first time that I've heard this kind of point being made, you know, particularly over the last 10 years, you know, when the issue of how little money most people signed to record companies actually made, when this is, you know, occasionally ventilated as it is, people start talking about living wages and minimum wages and things like that. And I just think it's an interesting debate to follow through, because if you're going to have a wage in the first place, that suggests that people would be working for the record companies in a way that they're not doing at the moment, are they? They're independent contractors.
No, but your relationship with the record company is exactly the same as your relationship with the publisher if you're an author, isn't it? You know, if you're an author, they simply say, we will arrange to put your book out. We might give you an advance, but that's against your royalties. What we're not doing is employing you. We're not giving you the same rights as somebody in the office, whereby, you know, you go and see HR and we're going to sort out a contract that involves, medical insurance and paid holidays. And, you know, none of that matters. They're simply putting out your book. And it's the same with record companies. The relationship is we put out this record. I mean, I can remember my old pal, Peter Plegvad, when he was a member of Henry Cow, and they were signed to Virgin, and they used to go along every week, and all the Virgin acts used to meet up on one of Richard Branson's barges, and he used to be given a brown manila envelope with, I think it was something like £100 in cash, quite a lot of money actually, and that was their living expenses. There was a barge next door which was Richard Branson's bar, and they would go next door and basically spend the entire £100 at Richard Branson's bar drinking with members of fellow Virgin groups. But that was not really wages. That was money, you know, given to them out of the advance based on the profits that they might make.
Well, also very often in those days, it's quite interesting if you're going to look at, you know, if you read Neil Story's books, detailed books about the Island label, you know, that they're very often the record company were representing them as a live agency at the same time, which is is somewhat a bit of a potential conflict of interest, you know. So you were getting paid against what the band might have been making out of gigs and so forth. But the record business as a whole, and it's kind of like the book publishing business, works on the basis that a tiny, tiny number make insane amounts of money and all the rest make nothing at all. That's basically how it works. That's a deal you kind of sign up for. You hope you're going to be in that tiny, tiny minority. And Chappell Roan, this is the great irony that right now she's in that tiny, tiny minority. And obviously, you know, people are turning up at her door on a daily basis with 4 hefty men carrying each corner of a large check for something different all the time, you know. And, you know, hey, you know, this may carry on for a while or it may not. And so to
she's
kind
the
of
least qualified to sit there and say I should be making a living wage. She is making a living wage, but
also she says I've contributed towards a fund for kind of musicians in need or whatever. I've given $20,000, which is good, fine. How many $20,000 does it take to give all those musicians a so-called living wage? I would suggest quite a lot of $20,000, because if you're going to adopt a kind of wage employment relationship, you're getting near to what used to go on in the Soviet Union, which is if you wanted to be an artist, you were licensed to be an artist by the government. They would only have a certain number of people being artists, and you would be allowed to be an artist as long as you didn't write anything critical about the government. You did absolutely what you were told. And the thing about the music business is, although we keep hearing, we hear this every few years, you know, and we're hearing it again with the AI debate, just as we used to hear it 40, 50 years ago when the debate was about home taping, or then it was, you know, many years later, it's Brexit, it's whatever. And people all said the same thing. If this goes on, musicians won't be able to make a living and therefore they'll stop trying. Well, there's no indication that they've stopped trying. Is there at all?
No.
Is anybody remotely for a second discouraged by this kind of thing? I don't think they are. Because
not remotely.
It's a mad human dream, isn't it? You know, to get in that tiny little percentage. And
if you're a musician and you didn't give it a go, you'd think later on in life, I should have tried, because at least I'd know I might have made it, I might not, but at least I would have discovered which.
But except the go nowadays lasts 30 years, doesn't it? Or 40 years.
Yeah.
It's not a quick thing and then I'll go away and settle down. It doesn't work like that. People keep going. And I'll tell you what's the other thing that struck me is that musicians, all kind of, I don't know, performers of any kind of actors, whatever, talking about inequity and unfairness. Do they ever reflect upon the fact that their businesses are monuments to inequity? That's what they are, and you notice this particularly in awards season when, we got the Oscars coming up in March, haven't we? This is how the film business works. There are tens of thousands of actors, but the film business decides by some strange process that actually all the parts are going to be done by 100 actors. That's how it works. They just do the same things again and again. And then out of that 100, once a year, we choose 8 of them who we particularly celebrate at the Oscars. And that's how it works. The work isn't spread around. And it's the same thing in music. It's not spread around.
But obviously that's understandable, because if those are the commercial people that people want to go and see, then they're going to get. Well,
it becomes a bit self-fulfilling, doesn't it?
it does.
It's like you go back to the Oasis tickets issue, which is we keep returning to this. I had this discussion around dinner table here about a week ago. Somebody hadn't got Oasis tickets, and my answer is, well, if you wait long enough, you will get them, because they won't be as sold out as they make out. But also, if you're complaining about how much it costs to go and see Oasis, don't go and see Oasis. Go and see somebody else who's cheaper. But nobody wants to do that. They all want to just celebrate a tiny minority of anything, and that's how awards work. That's how the public work. That's how we all work. And so don't start talking about how the record business is unfair. Of course it's unfair. It was built to be unfair. We like it that way.
It's just the way it is. Get used to it.
This is a junction in the Word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
Sad news this week that the leader of the first group I ever saw, the first concert I ever went to, Soft Machine. I know I'm always going on about it, but it's one of those things that it's just indelibly printed on the memory. But anyway, Mike Ratledge, the keyboard player of the Soft Machine, died aged 81. What I didn't know about him, I was just reading something about him, and he married in Soft Machine, huge deal in 1966, very fashionable.
Mark, can I just interrupt? No, they were never a huge deal.
No, huge deal
in the world, like kind of in the world of Mark Kellner. They were never a huge deal. They were huge deal cool. to me
and a few other people. They were intriguing.
And Mike Ratledge, if I'm correct, used to wear rectangular sunglasses.
Rectangular shades. You look like Roger McGuinn. Absolutely. Yeah, no, huge deal. I mean, huge deal in that kind of underworld. They were playing in the south of France. They were just very fashionable. And what I didn't realise is that he met in 1966. He met Marsha Hunt, who'd come over and was doing some recording, and didn't have a visa. And in order to extend her visa, it happened quite a bit. They decided to get married. I mean, I think they were fond of each other. They spent about a couple of months together after getting married in 1967, and then agreed to separate. And I was just reading a little thing which you talked about. She said, we never held hands and we never kissed, but he always comes for Easter. This was in 1991. Oh. So every year they got together for Easter. They were great friends. And when Hunt and Ratledge reached their 40th wedding anniversary, she called him up and said, jokingly, she said, we should renew our wedding vows. Oh. I just thought it was a really touching story. And she was asked about the secret of a successful marriage. She said, separate immediately.
Because Marsha Hunt I think she came over to be in Hair, didn't she? The tribal love rock musical. And she was very beautiful and had some very kind of memorable photographs taken. She was always on the cover of IT or something like this. And amongst her kind of paramours in those days was Mick Jagger. Because she had Mick Jagger's child, didn't she?
Yeah.
Paris. who Mick Jagger's
now 55 years old.
55 years old.
And also a big love affair with John Mayall and with Mark Bolan, I think, later on too.
Oh, God, yes. John Mayall. Good grief. Oh, Mark, I would say I've been reading a really good book this week, but I haven't. I've been listening to a really good book this week. And the book is Ben McIntyre's A Spy Among Friends, which is his version of the Kim Philby story. And the reason I wanted to mention it is that I've been listening to the audiobook, which is very good. And here's a key difference between listening to an audiobook and reading an actual physical book. And of course, I'm all in favor of physical books, or whatever. But when you get a physical book, you know a certain amount about it before you read it, which is you look at the cover, you read the stuff on the back. You probably look at the prints in the middle,
sleeve notes,
section of
a
photograph. And so you instantly have a kind of broad familiarity with all the characters who are going to turn up in the book. Whereas, Mark, if you listen to it, it's different. So it has a quality of surprise about it. And here's the particular quality of surprise in the Philby book. So Philby starts spying for the Soviet Union in the late 30s, all through the war, guilty of all kinds of traitorous activities, continues in the early 50s. Burgess and McLean go missing. He falls under suspicion as the third man who tipped him off. He brazens it out. He holds press conferences. No, nothing to it at all. And then finally, he gets a job working for The Observer and The Economist in Beirut as a journalist. And this is in the early 60s. And his two mates out there are kind of two old mates. One is Nick Elliott, who's a spy who's kind of gone to school and university with and known him forever. And the other, I realize as I'm listening to the story, is an American operative and family man who's out there enjoying their life of terrible indiscretion, all day drinking and absolutely high level gossip. And I'm thinking to myself, am I right? Is the character who's about to make an appearance Miles Copeland? Of course it is. And I can't tell you how exciting it is to be listening to the book. And you're thinking, oh, God, Miles Copeland's about to appear. Of course, Miles Copeland, father of Stuart of the police, and Miles, manager of the police, very successful, manager of all kinds of people. There they are in Beirut in the 60s.
So the dad was called Miles too.
Of course he is. Yeah. And it was just to hear the story in that way. And so the three of them were spending all the time together, and none of them quite knew what the other two were up to at all.
That's brilliant.
And so they didn't know that Copeland was still spying for the CIA and that Elliot was still spying for MI6 and Kim Philby was still spying for Russia. Absolutely extraordinary. Of course, young Stuart would be in there, on the beach parties and so forth. It's an absolutely extraordinary thing. And that's the kind of thing.
I remember interviewing Sting for BBC Two in Paris when he was managed by Miles Copeland, as he was for a long time, and Miles causing a big scene in a restaurant because there were no wild strawberries. He ordered strawberries, and they were kind of they were just your normal strawberries. He said, I insist on having wild strawberries, and got up and threw his arms about it. And I remember thinking, this is absolutely extraordinary. But that's a guy who'd just been used to that kind of privileged life, wasn't it? I want what I want, and I want to get it.
He'd probably regularly been at dinner parties where people had loosed off a revolver into the ceiling, when something on the pudding didn't meet with his approval. I don't know about your mum and dad, Mark, but it never went on in my house.
Not in my place.
That kind of behaviour. Anyway, Ben McIntyre's A Spy Among Friends, terribly good book, and particularly recommended to listen to.
The Word Podcast. Clearly, there is no plan.
Mark, remind me, who have we been talking to this week?
Well, we talked to Woody Woodmansey earlier,
yes.
which I think is out now, actually, that podcast. He was really interesting. And a lot of that is about the cultural differences of coming from Yorkshire and moving down to Beckenham age 19 or whatever, living in Haddon Hall with Bowie and his entourage, and just being stunned by Bowie's approach to the world. And they're all taken out on group outings. It was really fascinating, actually, to see mime shows, to see the ballet, to see avant-garde theatre, because Bowie wants them to understand the value of choreography and stagecraft. I learned a lot from it, actually. I thought it was really interesting. But so much of it was about this kind of slightly gruff northerner, kind of looking at these people and and thinking, this is another world, but I'm going to get on board because it's paying good money and it's fun.
Yeah, it is a classic illustration of the Paul Neuer's old joke about there's always one member of a group who looks as if he's saying, "Do I have to wear this, boss?" And
well, at one point, he remembers getting a call and being told that Mick Ronson was the one who complained. Mick Ronson was shown his stage gear, which was a kind of zip-up, shiny Spiders jumpsuit with silver boots or something. And apparently he was on his way to the station with his bags packed. And someone was
on his way back to
go
Hull.
And stop him. Going back to Hull to go and sit sulking in a room somewhere rather than be in the Spiders.
He's going to go and sit in the Fat Ox with Bob and Terry. Complain about what happened to him down in the city. Yes, I know the Fat Ox was in Newcastle. I'm aware it's not the same place as Hull, but metaphorically, you can stand in for Hull on this case. So that's one of the people we've been talking to, and we've also had their regular Friday night quiz. And if you haven't joined us for that, why not do so? And we provide all these things out of the goodness of our heart because we enjoy them. But it also doesn't hurt if people wanted to sign on as Patreon supporters and help support this valuable work of cultural and social importance. And one of our most redoubtable mainstays joined us on the occasion of his birthday this week to throw a log on the word in your ear fire, and that person was nothing less than Viv Stanshall lookalike Mr. Keith Hadley.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
Well, as you all know, our most generous supporters on Patreon, along with other benefits, get to stoke our conversational fire on the occasion of their birthday with a query. And we're joined by the fantastic Keith Hadley. Keith, very nice to see you. What is your query, sir?
So my query is, this is the vegan sausage I'm going to chuck on the barbecue of rock. You may have seen there's a thing called pitch black playback. Sorry, yeah. I'm running my teeth for somebody else. And basically, what you do is you pay a load of money to go and sit in a theatre or an auditorium or a planetarium in the dark, and you get your you can take home as a special gift your own eye mask, and you sit and you listen to an album in full on a state-of-the-art hi-fi. And you don't talk, you don't do anything, you just sit like you would have done back 50 years ago in your sounds room, in your house or flat, but you sit there and you listen. Now, quite an interesting concept. There's some in London, some in Manchester, I know there's some in Bristol. What alerted me to it is that the fact next week there's Colours by Adam F. that was a drum and bass album. And as I mentioned on my first birthday, one of these, Adam F., the son of Alvin Stardust and drum and bass star, who I was unfortunate enough to be his bank manager for a while. And they're putting this on at the Planetarium in Bristol. But you have your mask on and don't see anything. So my question to you, the rock and roll equivalent of Hale and Pace or Morecambe and Wise,
Hinge and bracket.
I didn't say that. My question to you two, my two good friends, is which kind of music do you think would work? What kind of music do you think wouldn't work? And albums that you think would work. Now, I will happily kick it off. I would think punk definitely wouldn't work.
No.
I would think some elements of folk would work. I would think Nick Drake and John Martin would work. I would think the albums that across several genres that would work definitely would be A Kind of Blue by Miles Davis.
Yeah.
Some Alice Coltrane and possibly some John Coltrane. Certainly, I think Tubular Bells, and certainly several pieces by the Floyd, be it Wish You Were Here or Dark Side of the Moon. I just wonder what the results from the North London and Chiswick jury are.
Dave, go ahead.
Are we the only people in the space, or are we sharing this space with other people?
Oh no, you share it with other people. So basically, you're in. So imagine it's a cinema. So
it's the same kind of reverence, isn't it?
You go in, you have your eye mask on, and you sit there in a comfy chair, obviously without crisps or fizzy pop, and you listen to this album.
Okay, but do we assume that the other people have heard it before or not? You see, do they share our warm feelings towards it? I don't know. Anyway, it's a very difficult thing because this is very unusual, isn't it? This is not our normal listening experience. Okay, I'm going to make two suggestions, and one is mischievous. I'm going to suggest that Randy Newman's Good Old Boys should be played in front of a cinema full of people who can't respond other than just go, oh my God. Because also the great thing about Randy Newman's Good Old Boys, apart from the fact it's immensely controversial nowadays, is it's got a narrative spine to it. And you know, most things that you concentrate on have a narrative spine. Music doesn't tend to have that, particularly pop music doesn't have that. A symphony does, you know, it has a certain development that you can share in. You know, most pop albums don't. But the other one I'm going to throw in, because I'm going to make a confession to you, Keith. I've only ever listened to one record stoned in my life. Okay? In my life.
I can't even imagine you stoned.
Drugs just simply, I cannot be arsed with them mucking about with them, you know, I just can't be bothered. But I did this in about 1973. Me and a flatmate listened to Michael Nesmith's pretty much your standard ranch stash, side two, which I've got in front of me. It's got three songs, Born to Love You, and then it's got a recitation of a strange business about a train crashing that then goes into his version of Uncle Pen, the old Bill Monroe favourite, and then finishes with Prairie Lullaby. I would really like to hear that again in a darkened theatre, possibly stoned, if you could arrange that.
Okay.
Some mushrooms.
Well, don't forget, I do live in Bristol, so
it won't be difficult.
You're the man.
Yeah, don't need a cookie if you're down in Bristol.
There's not a problem.
I think it's all about detail. I think it's about those records where they're rich with tiny little details that you need to concentrate on. And I would say, this is going to be stressful for some, I know, but I would say Radiohead would work. I would say Steely Dan would work. I'd say Sigur Rós, although it's pretty much one mood. I'd say instrumental jazz like Hot Rats. I would say 10cc Weather Report, Metal by the Pink Floyd. But the one I would say is a mate of mine bought a very expensive new stereo the other day, and to demonstrate it to me, played Simon and Garfunkel. And they just sound amazing.
Yes, they do.
Production, it's the details, it's the quality of their harmonies, it's Paul Simon's guitar playing, actually.
But also, I would add, and I speak as somebody who listened to Bookends only the other day.
Bookends was the one I was going to mention.
Bookends. Every single song on that record is a story.
Old Friends, America.
It's got drama. It carries you through.
Yeah.
What's going to happen in this song is what you want to know.
Yeah.
I think all those are good points. I mean, I'm just going to tell you what's coming up in Bristol. I've got no truck with it. So apart from that, they got the soundtrack of Interstellar by Hans Zimmer. Well, that's going to be pretty powerful.
Yeah.
30th anniversary of Maxi Quay by Tricky, obviously a Bristol favourite. Kendrick Lamar to Pimp a Butterfly, and Radiohead the Bends. So there we go. So that's and you pay £14 or £15 for the privilege of listening to something without seeing it in the pitch black.
In the pitch black? I think that's a good idea.
It's an interesting concept.
It is.
Well, you'll have to go, Keith, and report to us.
Yeah, report back.
The one that I was going to go is probably So next week, I'm still celebrating my birthday this week. It was this week, but I'm celebrating next week as well. And I'm off to Comedia in Bath to see the wonderful Nick Lowe.
So great.
I'm off to see Nick, who, as our dear friend Danny Baker says, every day is Nick Lowe's birthday. So, and I've also treated myself to a ticket for October at the Bristol Beacon. One ticket, Julie declined to come with me. One ticket to see the mighty Rick Wakeman do Myths and Legends of King Arthur and the Six Wives of Henry VIII. First half is Henry VIII, second half is King Arthur, and I think it will all be.
Any of it on ice?
No. I do have
one skate on.
I do have a cape to wear, though. I will be. I mean, look,
tinfoil cape.
It's me, Mark. Yes, I think it'll be full of older men with thinning hair and thickening waistlines.
Very good. Fantastic.
Okay.
Our kind of people. Fantastic. Happy birthday. Thanks for that. That was brilliant.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.